Again, we're very honored to have Frank and Leo today to give our community a workshop about how to allocate founders' share, as this is a very commonly asked question by founders. So Leo, do you want to take over from here?
Yes, thank you, Yifu.
Mm-hmm.
You may need to stop sharing your screen.
Oh, sure.
Let me try here. Okay, thank you for the introduction, Yifu. So hi, everyone. I'm Leo. I'm an attorney at Remon Law. Today, we will try to have maybe 40 minutes of workshop and then hopefully 30 minutes or even more Q&A for you guys. And for questions not answered, please feel free to send us an email and message, and our team will follow up with you. Just a quick disclaimer here. Although this communication may provide information concerning legal issues, it shall not substitute for legal advice. The term legal advice usually means just advice from a lawyer on your specific situation. A little bit about our firm. Remon is a law firm with internal entrepreneurial spirit. We have 44 offices and in 13 countries. In Asia, we have offices in Shenzhen, in Seoul, and Sydney. Our firm has been repeatedly recognized by the Financial Times as one of the North America's most innovative law firms. Our lawyers have also received numerous awards for excellence, including from Best Lawyers and Chambers. I need to say that the way people are seeking legal advice have been changing in recent years. Now the change is even more dramatic with the pandemic. In Remon, we didn't have hierarchical structure. We didn't spend a lot of money on fancy offices like traditional big law firms. Instead, we use our expertise, teamwork, and legal technology to deliver high quality yet cost-effective service to our clients. Just a quick introduction for Frank. Frank is a corporate partner at Remon. He has 34 years of experience in corporate and securities law. He's a former principal and co-founder of Athlon Capital LLC. He's also a former executive vice president and director of corporate finance for Doherty Securities. That is an investment banker. And he co-founded more than 26 companies. Frank holds a JD MBA from UC Berkeley and bachelor degree from Harvard University with honors. For me, I am a corporate attorney at Remon Law. I am specialized in emerging companies and venture capital, as well as mergers and acquisition. I'm also a certified information privacy professional. Prior to Remon, I was a legal counsel at Percolata Corporation. That is a machine learning company, a Series A company based in Palo Alto. That is backed by Anderson Horowitz and Google Ventures and the other venture capital firms. I had some prior experience in a biotech company, and that was in business development. So I have been working with scientists in the lab and working with engineers very closely. Sit there on their side, watching their coding, and I know how the experience was like in-house. I have JD degree from Santa Clara University of Law and in corporate specialization with honors. So without further ado, I'll give the mic to Frank. Frank.
Okay. Leo asked me to give a little bit more information about myself, so I'll try and do that. But, unfortunately, the older I get, the longer the explanation. I've actually been practicing for 37 years, going on 38. So it's been a long time. I started my practice in Silicon Valley back when in the early 1980s, when there wasn't much of a Silicon Valley. There were still apricot trees in Santa Clara County and orchards in Santa Clara County. So that's how far I go back. But I stayed here until 1989. And then I moved to Minnesota, Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I did a lot of medical device and healthcare stuff until 1995, when I started an investment bank, Athlon Capital, with 3 partners. Then I moved over to Doherty to run corporate finance for Doherty Securities, a large investment bank at the time. And then I started my own .com to automate mergers and acquisitions. And I did that until the .com crash. And then I came back to practicing law, and I've been practicing law since then again. Our practice is like Leo's. I do everything from startup work, which is actually my favorite work, all the way through the public offering, and with a lot of mergers and acquisitions now, and a lot of complex licensing, which is different than many lawyers, but it's because I started when Silicon Valley was small and lawyers did a little bit of everything. And so I continue to do that. I have started 26 companies, co-founded them. Most of the time I was the counsel and CFO in many cases, making sure that we didn't waste all our money on things. But I also ended up spending a lot of time trying to raise money, which is very, very difficult, as many of you know. But I also teach, I taught in the Master's in Business Administration program at 3 different universities, and currently teach at Santa Clara business organizations and startup law. So that's kind of my background as short as I can make it. So the first question that people often ask me, because they come in, most founders come in and say, okay, we want to start a company. Here's what we want to do. We think it's the greatest thing in the world. We really do believe in this, and we're willing to do what we need to do. And I say, that's great. Okay, talk to me. So we go through some of the legal issues, and then they say, and then I ask them, okay, how many shares do you want to issue, and how do you want to split it among you? And that always causes a pause, because most of the time they haven't really thought about that. And so this is a subject that over the years, I've read many, many articles about it, that people try to create formulas. And I saw there was one company that created a algorithm to try and scientifically allocate the shares appropriately, but it didn't work for lots of reasons. So this is a very, very tough issue to discuss, but it's very, very important. It's probably one of the most important issues on the legal side for the startup. Obviously, making sure you pick a good market opportunity is the best on the business side. But for the legal side, allocating the stock among the founders is often the most difficult and time consuming for the lawyer and for the founders. So why spend time on it? It's because it can cause lots of hard feelings later on. It can cause investors not to like a project or wanting to reallocate stock. And I'll talk more about that later. Is there a simple method for allocating stock? I wish there was, but unfortunately there's not. Unfortunately, there's no magic. There's no secret sauce that you can pour on and it'll automatically fix itself. It just doesn't. And we'll talk about some ideas how to do it, and we'll talk about the pros and cons of each. So, and then there's this concept that when I first started, most of the founders didn't talk about vesting at the beginning. We wouldn't talk about it until a venture investor came in, and then the venture investor would put this concept of vesting on. But today, almost all of the projects I've worked on, vesting is put in place at the incorporation for the founders. And I'll talk about why that's really important and how that can solve some of the problems that you have with allocating stock. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about what happens if there are issues later. How do you solve them? How do you fix them? And then one thing that's not mentioned here, we're going to talk a little bit about investors, what they look for, and how that folds into the founder stock allocation. You want to switch, Leo?
Yes.
So we talked about, why is allocating stock important? So the problem is, if I have a founder who comes in, or a group of founders who come in. And let's say there's 4 of them and they're friends. They've become friends at a big firm like Google or Facebook or wherever, and they've got a great idea and they wanted to do it together, and they're just really close friends. And they come to me and I ask them, how do you want to allocate the stock? And they all look at each other, and nobody wants to offend the other person. They don't want to offend, even though they might have ideas in their own head about, well, I should get more because of this, or I should get more because of that, or they should get more, whatever. They don't want to offend because they're friends. It's a hard discussion. But on the other hand, if you don't have that hard discussion, if things don't go well in the future, then there's hard feelings because you haven't vocalized your feelings. You're going to be upset if something goes wrong and it turns out your feelings were right. You're going to be, oh my goodness, I should have said something, but you didn't. And so there's this idea, this hard feeling. People are mad. They're frustrated because things didn't work out right. Whereas if you anticipate it, if you think about it, if you talk, then you can hopefully make a good decision. It's not going to be perfect, but a good decision. You're also trying to avoid this concept of a free rider. And that's actually comes from economics. But a free rider, for those of you who don't know, is someone who, think of a car and I'm driving and someone's sitting in the back and I stopped at a stoplight and they just got in the back seat and they're not paying me. I'm not an Uber driver. I'm not a Lyft driver. They're just riding along with me for free. And I'm driving, it's my car, my gas, especially now that it's expensive, everything. They're a free rider. They're not paying anything. So I'm driving them along and they're just riding along. And that would be fine if I wanted that. But sometimes I don't want that. Who are you? Why are you in my back seat? You're not helping me at all. At least, give me some water from the back seat or do something. And the founders are the same way. What you don't want to have is one person who doesn't do anything. They're a free rider. They're like that person sitting in the back seat. You and the other co-founders are busy, pedaling the car to try and make it go faster, or think of it as a bike trying to go faster. And the person in the back is just sitting there with their feet in the air of the bike, not pedaling. That's a free rider. And that makes people upset. And that's even if the project is successful, it causes hard feeling. Now, everyone wants to make money. Most of the time, I've had clients who didn't really care about money. They wanted to improve the world. Like Yifu was saying, where some of the companies that have been funded are medical companies that if you look at what they're doing, they're actually improving health for everyone. That's improving mankind. So some people, that's all they care about. But most people, they're like me. They're a little greedy. They want money. And so it's important to anticipate bad feelings at exit. And I'll give you an example real quickly before we go, is I represented a company a number of years ago that was started by 3 professors at a well-known university. And after they incorporated, I wasn't representing them at the time of the incorporation. After they were incorporated, one of the professors decided that he didn't like it and he was going to go back to being a professor. Well, they had allocated the shares as if they all 3 were going to work for this company. So, the 2 other founders, they worked really hard. They worked long hours. They didn't get paid as well. They were worried, but it all ended up well for them. I think it was 6 years later, the company was acquired and they each made $20 million. So you would have thought that they would all be ecstatic and happy. This is a great thing. They weren't. The 2 founders were upset because the 3rd founder got as much as they did. And that 3rd founder was a free rider. And so they were very upset and very angry. So even though they made money, they were upset about it. And that's, again, a reason why think about that allocation now to avoid that hard feelings later, even if you make money. Okay, Leo, you want to change?
Yes.
And let me know how I'm doing on time, Leo, if you could.
Maybe a little faster.
Yeah, okay. So I'll try to go through this slide a little bit faster. I have to put on my reading glasses because it's small here. But this slide is trying, the pie charts here are trying to show you how the founder's interest evolves over time and investments. So if you see the top here, let's say there's 2 founders and they each start with half of the stock. They just divide the stock equally. After what's called a friends and family round, where you're raising money from friends and family to get going, they're down to 37.5%. And then you also have this, what's in the yellow, you'll see this 15% is an option pool. Is that the magic number for options, by the way? No, that's just, think of it as a stake in the ground to show you, for example, it could be lower, it could be higher. That's the number. So we're just using it for example's sake. Is the 10% right? No, we're just using it for example. But this gives you an idea. The next round, you add angel investors who are going to put money in. And you can see, again, the founders have gone down. Finally, in the later stage, so let's say after a Series A investment, you'll see again, the founders are even smaller because now you added venture investors who are putting money in. The option pool has actually grown because you have more employees and you're doing things. Now, again, these numbers can go up or down. It depends. This is just an example. But finally, you'll see this at the end where now the founders have significantly less than they had at the beginning. And so what you're trying to show people is that's fine if at the beginning those shares are worth 1,000th of a cent, and at the end, each of their interest is worth $500 million. Those founders will be very ecstatic if at the end it's worth $500 million, even if they have a smaller percentage. But you can't assume that. You have to think ahead and say, all right, I want to make sure that at the end of the story, at the exit, I have enough that I'm incentivized to do this project. Okay, Leo, do you want to switch?
Yeah, exactly.
As I said before, there's no really good formula for allocating stock. People have tried over the years, over the last 30 years that I know of, there have been lots of magazine articles about how to allocate stocks. Some venture funds have put out articles on how to allocate stock, how they think it should be done. I was working with a group, and one of the engineers put together a really complicated spreadsheet to try and figure out how to allocate it. And we just spent time poking holes in the spreadsheet, why it didn't work. Because think of it, those of you who are mathematically inclined, there's an infinite number of variables. And because it's an infinite number of variables, you can't really create a good algorithm for it. It's just too difficult to do. And you've got the human element, which causes more problems. I mean, each of us have our own problems. We've got our issues. And, as a lawyer, lawyers tend to be prima donnas. We think of ourselves as wonderful, brilliant people. And that's our problem. We think we're better than maybe we really are. And some of our clients might think we're not as good as we think we are, for sure. But that's something that it's just human nature. So what does a founding team do? I mean, how can they do? The answer is, I always tell people, do your best. What things, then they ask, what things should we think about? And I tell them, okay, there's lots of things, but think about, are any of you putting money in? For example, I had a client where one of the founders was going to put $100,000 in. And so the founding team was discussing, okay, well, should he get more stock because he's going to put $100,000 in? And usually, myself, this is just my opinion, other lawyers will differ. Usually, I suggest not. I suggest treating that person like they were a friends and family or angel investor, because I really want the founding shares to be allocated based on their contribution to the company now and in the future. Going on, what if one is working full time and the others are not? So, when the founders come in and one says, well, I'm going to work full time and John and Fred are going to join after we raise a little bit of money, or after they get their holiday bonus, or after something happens. How do we allocate? That's something to consider. It's important, and you can do things with that. And the things that you can do would take me longer than our talk. So just know that there are ways to allocate stock in that situation. And it has to do, by the way, with vesting. So that's a segue into the next talk, but let's keep going. Also, you want to look at how investors will look at the allocation. They want to make sure that the key people, and I put that in quotes, are incentivized appropriately. If you've allocated equally, but investors don't see the founders as equal, they may not like it. And I always tell people that getting investors is like jumping over a hurdle, and you're trying to get that hurdle as low as possible so you don't have to jump very high. But if you haven't allocated the stock properly, you've raised the hurdle, so it's harder to get over to get an investor to invest, or the investor might come to you and say, we don't like the way you allocated, we want you to reallocate the stock. And that's something they don't like to do. So they would rather pass on an investment than do a reallocation because hard feelings again. Think about, as we showed on those pie charts, think about how the split will affect the value of your shares, of the founder shares on an exit. And when you do that, think not just 1 year, because that's important, but think 5 years in the future. Oftentimes when founders come in, I talk to them and I say, okay, tell me where you want to be in 5 years, because I want to understand what their goals are. And 5 years is a good horizon to start with. Okay, Leo, you want to change again?
Yes.
Okay. So think about, I'm going to give you some examples, one of which is here, or two of which is here, and then I'll also try to give you some examples from our practice, mentioning no names, of course. So let's say that Leo, Frank, and Michael, we work as a team, are starting a company. Leo is working full-time, but Frank and Michael have said they want to join when the company raises some money, which is often the case because Frank and Michael may not have enough money to take no salary for a period of time while the company is going to start until it raises some money so that they can get paid. But Michael is a serial successful entrepreneur, and some venture capitalists have said they would like to fund something he does. All right, that's a pretty loaded scenario, but not atypical of what you would see. So one thing they could do, it's simple, divide the equity equally. Many of our clients do that. They just say, we're going to divide this stock equally. And that's fine. But you ask yourself, Leo, will he feel bad since he is working full time? Or will he consider this short-term issue and Michael, Frank will be there once the money is raised? Okay, it's not here, but what happens if Frank and Michael never go full-time? They just continue part-time. Now that equal divide doesn't look as fair. And Leo's going to be upset. Leo's a super sweet, nice person. As you can see, he's smiling. He's got a great smile. He's happy. So he's happy, but will he be still smiling when Michael and I say, oh, Leo, we've decided not to go full-time. We're going to go part-time. Is that okay with you? He's probably not going to be happy about that. So that's something to consider. But also, will Michael be happy since he's like the one investors will invest in? He might say, no, I should get more because I'm the key person that investors want to see. And so he should get more. Even though Leo's working full-time, he should get more than Leo, even though Michael's working part-time. You could try something else. So for example, you could say, okay, we're going to give Leo more because he's working full-time at the beginning. But what if Frank is going to contribute more long-term? So let's say Leo is really critical at the beginning because he's doing something very important at the beginning. But after a year, his value is going to go down, but Frank's goes way up because of something Frank is an expert at. Then all of a sudden, if you're looking in the future in 5 years, maybe Frank should be getting more because he's the most valuable long-term. Okay. And what about Michael, who's going to be fundable person? Again, going back to, should he be the one who gets the most? So you can see this is not an easy decision at all to make. It's one that requires a lot of discussion and it's not perfect. They think about, give you one more example from a company that I was working with. I started a company, co-founded a company back in 1991 that ended up going public. And so, wow, wonderful story. Company went public, everybody made money. Unfortunately, one of the founders, I always refer to him as the reluctant entrepreneur. He just didn't want to be there. Every meeting we had, he would complain about how horrible this was. And, we would have to push him all the time to get things done. And he kept saying, I'm going to leave, I'm going to leave, I'm going to leave. And the rest of us were like, at some point we were finally, just leave. But, he stayed, but it was painful. The process was painful. And we had done an equal split. And it turned out that the contribution of our third founder far outweighed myself and my other co-founder, the reluctant entrepreneur, contribution. And so sure enough, after a year and our one partner was complaining all the time, the third partner whose contribution had started to go like that, he started to get upset, and he was angry and upset and kept talking to me and saying, can we reallocate these shares? And I would say, we can, but we need, so-and-so's consent because we can't do it by ourselves. And he goes, oh, well, is there anything we can do? And we talked about what we could do, and it's not fun and it's difficult, and we decided not to do it. Like I said, the end of the story is good. There was an IPO, everybody made a lot of money, but there was still some animosity that stayed there because the allocation wasn't fair. Does that mean you can make the perfect allocation? No. So what do you do? Leo, do you want to switch slides?
Yes.
And how am I doing on time?
Good. You're good.
Okay, good. Okay, so one of the things that you can do to solve the problem or to alleviate or help the problem is vesting. So what is vesting to start with? And some of you know what this is, some of you don't. And there's two types of vesting that you've probably heard of. There's vesting for stock, and there's vesting for stock options or restricted stock units. That's the different types of vesting. And one, the company has the right to repurchase with stock, has to repurchase a declining percentage of the stock over time. They start with 100%, they can repurchase 100% of the stock, and it goes to zero. With options and restricted stock units, you're vested, meaning that you can actually exercise the option or restricted stock unit. You can't exercise anything at the beginning, and over time it goes to 100%. So the lines on the graph go opposite. One goes up and the other goes down, but it's essentially the same concept. Is vesting allows the company to make sure that you're going to be available when the company needs you. With stock, if you're not available, then the company can repurchase your stock, usually at fair market value or your purchase price. And with restricted stock units or options, they can just terminate you, and you can only exercise the options which have vested at that time. So that's what vesting is. So why does it matter in this allocation? Well, what happens if one of the founders leave after the company started, but before there's an exit, and takes all his stock with him? For example, my example of the three professors, that professor left, a week or two after they started and took all of his stock with him. Well, there was no vesting there. The company didn't have the right to repurchase his stock, so he took all of that stock with him. Well, what does that mean for that company? It meant that his role was important, so they had to go find somebody else to fill his role, and they had to give that person stock. And what that meant is that diluted everybody. And if you don't understand dilution, I'll give you a very simple example. Let's say, for simplicity's sake, let's say that they each issue to themselves 250 shares each. So there were 750 total shares outstanding. The professor left, taking his 250 shares. The other two professors, founders, needed to find a third person to take over. That third person comes in and says, I need 250 shares. So now they have to give that person 250 shares. That has diluted all three of them. From when they had 250 each, they each had approximately 33 and a third percent. Now they're down to 25%. The third professor, the free rider, he's okay because he's gone. He doesn't care. But the two professors who are working still, they've now lost 8%, really, for doing nothing wrong. So they're very, very unhappy with that. They're diluting their equity percentage because this person left. So why does the vessel with vesting, you protect against that, because you say that professor who left, the company gets to repurchase his stock, all of it, 250,000 shares, at the price he paid, which was nothing usually on incorporation. So why does the vesting decline over time? Because the idea is that over time, one, that person will be less necessary, and two, that as the company grows, there'll be more people who will be able to cover if that person leaves. And so that's why investors are okay and other founders are okay if that declines, because they say, well, that's only fair. If you work for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, you deserve to keep some of that stock because you've worked hard for it. Okay, Kimi, the vesting allows the company to repurchase the stock. Vesting also helps with allocation because, again, if that person is not pulling his weight, you can say to that person, well, it's not working out. We're thinking we probably should go our own way unless you're willing to consider taking less stock. That's a tough conversation, but it's one that could happen. And with that, Leo, can you switch slides?
Yeah.
So again, founding unhappiness. Many of you probably have friends who founded companies, and many of them have no problems. Everybody's happy. The company goes on to great success, and people talk about how wonderful it is. First-time successful entrepreneurs are horrible people to know because they don't know what the agony is of failure. My favorite entrepreneurs are the ones who failed and then succeeded because they know failure and they know success. But one of the things that those people really understand is they get this whole vesting concept. They get the founder allocation concept because they've been through it once before and they've seen the good and the bad. So clients come to me and say, okay, Frank, you brought this allocation issue. You've talked about ways we could do it. And now we're at the point of it didn't work out. We allocated this way and it's just not working. And they come to me and they say, how do we solve it? And they, the first thing many times they'll come and say, do we need a litigator? A litigator is someone who goes to court. And I always tell them, absolutely not. Avoid that if you can, because our litigation partners are wonderful people. They're very expensive. And as a startup company, you don't want to pay money for litigators to do something because they really don't add value. They just keep you from paying money. So they're important, but try to avoid them. So I always tell them, no, let's see if we can avoid that. So how do you solve when things go wrong? And this is really a tough conversation. Sometimes I tell people, think of it like a marriage that has gone wrong. Or think of it as you joined a club and you've got to kick out a member, or you've got to do something with a member. A member isn't performing right. And the best way, everybody agrees that the best way to solve these problems is communication, talking. And I always tell people, do it with kind communication. If it's got to the point where you hate the person, again, think of a divorce that's very, very tough, where the spouses hate each other. Those divorces are expensive, they're miserable for everybody, and they don't get resolved easily. My favorite divorce was a couple I knew. They were both very wealthy when they got married. They were wealthy at the time. Their total legal bill was $900 for the divorce. And they ended up being neighbors because they had discussion. They knew it wasn't working, but they still liked each other. They still were friends. They started the discussion early before it got terrible, that sort of thing. Same thing here. Think about it and think about the nice discussion among each other. Talk to the person. Chances are that person probably knows there's a problem. They probably know that things aren't going well. And so oftentimes it's almost a relief. They're sad, they're unhappy. They maybe even be a little bit angry, but at the same time, at least they say, finally, it's in the open. Finally, we can talk about it. And so this communication is really key, especially among friends. I can tell you that among my friends, we have some hard discussions sometimes and some feelings get hurt, but at the end of it, everybody's happier because now people are feeling like they've been heard. So sometimes you negotiate a reduction. That's one of the solutions in stock. You just say, okay, it's not working out. You're not adding the same value. We'd like to reduce your stock. And that person says, yes, that's easy. If they're not going to agree to the reduction and you say it's just not working out, there's hard feelings, we need to just separate. Then you've got, if you've used vesting, you've got this ability to repurchase stock. And it may be all of their stock or some percentage of their stock. So you can repurchase it. But you might, again, in the spirit of being kind, and oftentimes this is the case, is the founder will negotiate getting a little bit more than they're entitled to in order for, quote unquote, good feelings to survive, because the company doesn't want that founder to be saying horrible things about the company. So they often will negotiate and say, hey, let's keep things nice. Give me an extra 6 months of vesting or 12 months of vesting. That sort of thing happens. Okay, Leo, do you want to go to the next slide?
Yes. So in these slides, I want to talk about, Frank mentioned that there are some ideas about share allocation, and when you talk about it, everyone is has come to an agreement that they want to reallocate their shares. But I gotta say, I have seen a lot of Chinese founders. They just have oral agreement or just email agreement. So I don't think it's a good idea. I strongly recommend you have separation and mutual release, or if you have reallocation, you got repurchase agreement. You need to write it down. So another thing is, I often see there is a relationship and resource founders in Chinese community that we often see, as 资源合伙人. Sometimes they have some connections with state officials, or some connections to get hospitals for some data from healthcare data to do some analysis. So I think they are usually not long-term founders, and it's very hard if you have that kind of co-founders, and it's pretty uncertain if you don't write it down, because you feel like it's their resources or their relationship might not be good to write it down, because it's probably not legitimate. But I would say that if that's the case, they are probably not your long-term founders, and I strongly recommend you write down some milestone schedule to quantify, their contribution to the company, and otherwise they just become free riders oftentimes. And there's another thing is common in our Chinese community, that is 股权代持. That need to be analyzed based on your specific situation. So that has very unique risks. So just another issue here. Okay, so Frank, next slides.
Thank you. So again, going back to this idea of allocation, I spoke a little bit about how investors care about how it's allocated to make sure that the key person is sufficiently incentivized. So what we're going to talk about is give you kind of some ideas about how a capitalization might look and what effect it might have, the financing might have, like our pie chart on the amount that founders have, percentage shares. And for this example, I just asked Leo, can we do what I do? And I authorize 10 million shares of common stock. And founders will always ask me, why 10 million? And I say, because it's a nice round number. And it's, I've been doing this for a long time. It just seems to be a good number. Could you issue more? Absolutely. Do some companies issue more? Yes. Do some other lawyers suggest issuing more? Yes. I just use 10 million because that's a good number. So that's what we're using, for example. And then I also use a round number for what to issue to the founders, and it's 4 million. Again, no magic to it. It's just a nice round number. The difference, the 6 million, is what the shares that might be available to issue later on. And just a little bit of legal knowledge. what happens is when you incorporate, you file this thing called a certificate of incorporation with the Secretary of State, and in case of Delaware. And in that certificate of incorporation, you disclose to the state and everybody how many shares you can issue. And that's the 10 million. That's the most you can issue without going back and amending that certificate that gets filed with the Secretary of State. So you want to make sure you have enough shares that you can issue without having to go back to the Secretary of State. So that's why the difference between 10 million and 4 million, because some founders say to me, why can't I just issue the 10 million that's authorized? And they can, but that means if they issue one more share, they've got to go back and file, and that costs money. And for most startups, cash is very important. So spending money like that, they don't want to do. So in Silicon Valley, the normal vesting is 48 months with a 1-year cliff, meaning that graph that I showed, for 1 year, it's like this, and then it drops like a step, and then it goes down like that. I don't know if you can see my hands, but basically it's a cliff and then going down. And that's the 12 months. At 12 months, 1/4 of the shares vest. So that's what the drop is. And then the other 3/4 vests over the next 36 months. Okay, Leo. So this is what investors care about and why allocation matters. So they care about the possible dilution over numerous financing rounds. So for example, if the allocation isn't proper, isn't right, and they have to give somebody more shares because they didn't have enough incentive, that dilutes everybody. They care about the valuation at this stage because they want to know, okay, if you have to raise more money, then you're going to have to sell more stock, which dilutes everyone. And again, if at that time that you have to sell more stock, if you have to issue more stock to one of the founders because they're not incentivized, dilutes everybody. If you haven't allocated the stock properly among the founders, and now I'm going to talk about the stock option pool, for example, if you don't have enough shares in that stock option pool to hire people that are necessary to fill in where the founders are not, and just to grow as a company needs to grow, then you're going to have to take more stock to put into that stock option pool, once again, diluting everybody. So when we looked at those pie charts a while ago, and you saw that option pool and you saw it growing, as it grows, it dilutes everybody, including the founders and investors. So that's why investors care about that allocation. And they also oftentimes will say, and how does that stock option, have you thought about stock options and what are you thinking? So oftentimes people, when they do allocation, I'll talk to them about, what are you thinking about issuing in the first year to future employees as part of that allocation discussion. So the next thing is, and this is not so much allocation, but just general information, is what type of security best enables them to achieve their goals? These are investors. And so Leo, do you want to switch there?
Yeah.
So when I first started practicing back in the dark ages in the 1980s, founders, when they raised money with friends and family and angel investors, they sold common stock. That really stopped in the 2000s, and it stopped for two reasons. One of which was companies initially, when I was practicing, they would issue stock options very early in the company's life. And so people didn't have to pay any money to get the stock. The stock option says you have the right to purchase stock in the future at a set price. And so you don't pay until you actually exercise the option, and then you give the company a check for whatever the exercise price is. So you don't care as much what that exercise price is, because you're only going to exercise if the stock's valuable. Whereas with purchasing stock, you want it as cheap as possible, because if you're getting an option for 100,000 shares at $1, that dollar doesn't seem like much. But if you're getting 100,000, you're having to buy 100,000 shares at $1, $100,000 is a lot of money, because in one case, you're getting an option to buy at $1 for 10 years. And you're saying, well, in 10 years, if it's not worth $1, I just won't exercise. Whereas if you're getting 100,000 shares at $1, you're actually having to give $100,000 to the company. So that's really important. So that price is important. And the other, so people want to continue to sell common stock at a low price. And the United States Internal Revenue Service and most other tax organizations would say, if you're selling to a third party at $1, you can't then turn around and sell to an employee at a penny. That's not right. That's income to that person, the difference. So companies said, oh, that's not good. We don't really want to issue common stock to our investors because then that sets the price for our employees. The investors, on the other hand, what happened to them was in the 2000s, especially after the dot-com burst, is a lot of them had bought common stock at $4 or $5. And then the company raised more money at 10 cents or 50 cents and completely washed them out. And they said, that's not fair. We don't like that. We need something to protect ourselves because we're just common. We can't protect ourselves in any way. If a subsequent investor comes in at a lower price, we have no protection. So what ended up happening was that many things were tried. People tried issuing special preferred stock, Series X preferred, Series C preferred, Series F, all kinds of different things. But the winner kind of became convertible notes because investors said, this is good because I don't have to buy today. I can wait until a sophisticated investor comes in and sets the value because that sophisticated investor is smarter than me. And the way that the investors protect and get that sophisticated investor is the convertible notes say, that convertible note will automatically convert only if the company raises $1 to $2 million. And the thought is that for the company raise $1 to $2 million, you have to have at least one fairly sophisticated investor. That's not going to be, somebody who's investing $25,000 to $50,000. It's unusual for them to do that and raise $1 million to $2 million. It can be done. It's just unusual. Usually, it's one, sophisticated investor putting $500,000 to $1 million to $2 million in, and so investors say, $I'm comfortable with that person setting the price. But the advantage is they convert at a discount to that investor. So if that investor is investing at 10 million, they would invest at a discount of say 15%. So they would invest at 8.5 million and get the exact same security. And the reason for that was they wanted to get some value for them investing their money early. But they also got interest. They also had this concept of what happens sometimes, and especially today, is they'll do the convertible notes, but the price gets away. The Series A price or whatever that equity financing is going to trigger a conversion gets away. And for example, I did one where the Series A value was $50 million. And so these investors, they could have invested at 5 million and they got a discount of 15%, but it was at 50 million. So they were really upset by that and said, that's not fair. So investors figured out and they said, now we're going to not only have the discount, but we're going to have this concept called a valuation cap saying the most we will pay. And for example, if they have a discount of 15% and a valuation cap of 10 million, and the Series A or whatever triggers the conversion is 20 million, the 15% discount would only be a $3 million discount or 17 million, but the valuation cap said they only have to pay 10 million. So they really like that. The only downside to convertible notes was they were paid interest, but the interest was never paid. But for US tax purposes, they had to include the interest as if it was paid. And if you're investing $500,000 and paying, you're getting 4% interest, that's a lot of money to include in your income and pay taxes on without ever getting the money. So they were looking for a better alternative. And along came this concept of a safe. And the first safe, I think, was created by Y Combinator, which is a local incubator here in Silicon Valley. And it's very similar to a convertible note. In fact, it's almost exactly the same, except it doesn't have interest. And so now it doesn't have that downside to the investor. And it's evolved over time. And I won't go into that because we could talk again all this time about safes and whether they're good or bad. And then finally, most recently in the last year for us, we've seen a substantial increase in this thing called Series C convertible preferred. And I like to think of it as what I used to think of as a Series A preferred is now a Series C preferred. It's much earlier than the Series B. So the company oftentimes doesn't have its product done. It doesn't have any customers, doesn't have really much going, but it's got a really good idea, a really good team, whatever. Series C. And it looks a lot like a Series A, which is a venture-backed convertible preferred stock. It's a different type of stock than common in that it has certain preferences. They get paid dividends before common stock. They get paid liquidation. So if there's an acquisition, they get paid in preference to the common stock. And depending on the price, they get paid more or the same. And they have some voting rights. For example, they might get to elect a director. Okay, Leo, why don't we switch? Because I think I'm running out of time. Very quickly here. So just want to go through this sample cap table with you guys to give you an idea of how this might look with money involved. So we did the pie charts. Now it's with money involved. So you can see here, the founders, 4 million, they were issued 2 million shares. And then we've got this Series C preferred stock, and you've got an option plan that's being created. So you can see as you follow the graph through, what happens to the founders over time is their percentage has decreased. And the angel investors, they get the board seat, but they have 20% for $1 million and for $1,500,000. And then the option pool is 10%. The thing to keep in mind with this table is, and I usually will work with my clients to create tables like this, but I go out 5 years to look at what could happen. Focus on the allocation among yourselves. What do you want it to look like? And then secondly, focus on the option pool. The investors, it's hard to judge what that's going to be, but you can have a good idea on the options and the allocation among founders. Okay, Leo, you want to switch?
Yes. So we have now we have a Q&A section, and so I have a question for you, Frank. Sure. So just for the last slides, what do you think for to using a cap table in your spreadsheet versus using online transfer agent like Carta? What's the pros and cons? And Capital IO, I think you're the advisor of Capital IO. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm a cap table of LTSE, which is their parent company. So I haven't really used Carta and cap table IO's what if.
Some of my clients did, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's really good. I did use cap tables early on when they were first experimenting with it because I was giving them feedback on it, and they're very good. They're great. The problem is you can only do so much with them, and because I want to look 5 years out and I want to do certain things, it's not perfect. It's really good if that's all you have. If you're not good with spreadsheets or you don't understand this at all, they're great to have because they're easy to work with. They are. But if you've got a good advisor who's good with spreadsheets or understands how to do analysis, cap table analysis and what if analysis, then it's better to do it with a spreadsheet because you can do a lot more with it. But if you're not comfortable with that or you don't have advisors, then Carta and cap table are fabulous.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you. So Ifo,
yes, I think I think we have some Q&A questions raised by the audience. And also, by the way, thank you, Frank and Leo, very much. It's a very fruitful and informative session you have been presenting. And the first question is from Abel Joe. So I'm trying to read the question here. So will venture investors accept that the founder holds 100% management shares?
I think Abel is asking that there's only the single founder. Assuming that's the question. Frank, what do you think? A single founder versus 3 founders?
The biggest problem with a single founder, and this is terrible to say, is what happens if they die. And it is what investors think. They worry what happens if they die. Mm-hmm. And that's why they're uncomfortable investing in just a single founder.
Mm-hmm. But
now, if the founder is a serial entrepreneur, very, very successful, they'll do it anyway. But otherwise, if it's someone who doesn't have success in their record, what they'll do is they'll tell them, go and get another co-founder, and then we'll talk to you if they like the idea.
Yeah. But I've seen pretty common people have companies usually have key person insurance, and when they get money, they can have the second, third key person.
Yeah. That's that's a lot of times what in the old days we did that no matter what is the founders had key man insurance. Today I see it I see it a lot less, but I don't have a lot of single founders because again I think it's harder to raise money with single founders.
So the second question is raised by Susan Lee, and I think this is referring to the example that Frank gave us in the session. So why didn't they reform the company if the professor left early?
Well, it's a good question, and it's often the one that people struggle with. Is in their case, they had already created some really significant intellectual property, which they patented, and they couldn't really take it without rewarding that other founder. And that often happens is you've already created IP, which you can't recreate easily. If you can recreate it, and I've done this before, sometimes that's what you do is you basically shut down the company and restart a new company with new intellectual property. You can't use the old intellectual property or you get into legal issues, but if you can recreate it and patent it and do all that kind of stuff, then that's what you can do that. But often that's not the case. You can't do that.
Thanks, Frank. And also for our audience, if you want to raise question for Frank and Leo, please use the Q&A button here. And we're getting private messages, but we want to make sure that we can all see it as a Q&A panel over there. So let's move on. So the next question is from Chiang Gan. And asking, could Frank or Leo talk a little bit more about stock dilution and anti-dilution? Thank you.
You want me to do that,
That's
Leo?
a big topic.
Yeah, Frank, yes. I saw a lot of anti-dilution provisions in the venture capital agreements. If you could talk about a little bit about that'd be great.
Sure. So there's two types of anti-dilution, but most of the time when you hear anti-dilution, it'll be what's called price-based anti-dilution and the protections related to that. So, but just first, there's dilution, which, like I said, my example is if the three founders have 750 shares among themselves, and they have to issue that 250 shares to the new person because the other professor left. That is diluting the three founders 8% each because they have to issue that 25% to the new person. It's a little bit more than 8.3% or something like that. That gets that's diluting those people. So that's dilution. It just has, you're issuing more shares of the company, thereby diluting the existing shareholders. That's all dilution is. Anti-dilution is used, there's structural anti-dilution, which just has to do with stock splits, which I won't talk about now because I'll probably confuse everybody. But for lawyers, it's really, even for young lawyers, it's hard to understand. But what venture people talk about anti-dilution, they're talking about price-based anti-dilution, and it's usually in Series C or convertible preferred documents in the certificate of incorporation. And what its intention is to protect the investors from dilution. Remember the example, having to issue more shares, which causes everybody's percentage to decrease because the company issues stock at less than that investor paid. And the investor doesn't like that because what they want to see is the price go up. As long as the price is going up, dilution doesn't really bother them. Remember when I talked about the pie and I said at the end, I think the founders had 17.9%, but I said if it's worth $500 million, they're not that upset by it. It's the same with investors. If they went from, say, 20% to 15% because of a big financing, but their investment tripled in value or quadrupled in value, they're okay with it. They're happy because that's what they want to see. They'll take less ownership for a higher value of their ownership. But what happens if instead their value actually went down. Then they're saying what they do is they want to punish everybody except for them. And the way they do that is this anti-dilution provisions, which are in the certificate of incorporation. And there are two types. One's called full ratchet and one's weighted average. Weighted average is what's common. And what they do is they weight, meaning they hold in two hands, think of it that way, the number of shares that are issued at a lower price and what the price is. So for example, if it's only one share and it's only 1 penny less, that's not going to dilute them very much. So they don't really do much. But if it's a lot of shares at a very low price, then it's really going to dilute them. And then they take action and they use this price-based anti-dilution. What they do is they affect the conversion ratio. Preferred stock initially converts to common stock, and it initially converts 1 share of preferred converts into 1 share of common. But what they do with the anti-dilution is they make the conversion more. So depending on what happens, it might be 1 share of preferred converts into 1.1 share of common, so that the preferred actually aren't diluted as much as they would otherwise be. It's a tough to explain in a short amount of time. Hopefully I did that.
For sure. Good explanation. Thank you, Frank. I saw a question here is asking, do venture investors ask for management shares? I'll try to answer that. So I've often see is that the venture capitalist will have a board seat, usually Series A or Series B, they'll have board seat. And then the company will sign a management rights letter to give the investor some, board observer or financial rights in that. As far as management shares, they are just getting preferred shares. The common shares are usually still, on the founder's hands. Okay.
Well, thanks, Leo. Let's move on. So I see a very interesting question here as Web3 fundraising is getting crazy. So the audience is asking, what's a typical equity structure among founders if it's a blockchain company with the token issuance as another form of equity?
So Leo, what was that? I missed it. Or you repeat that again?
I think he's asking for a blockchain company. I think Frank's ideas on the founder share allocation could apply to that. But Frank, what's your thought on a blockchain company?
Well,
and the token, and I think they asked about if the token can be. If you can clarify that.
Yes, so basically, majority of the blockchain company will issue the token, so as another form of the equity. So they would like to know what's your thought on that.
Frank, do you have experience on that?
I don't. I guess I don't understand the question. What are they asking? Could they issue tokens as the security rather than stock?
No, they're asking what's going to be a typical equity structure for those kind of companies.
Okay.
Are they going to be like, yeah.
Okay. Often, I haven't done a ton of token and now NFT companies, but the ones that I have, and I've done a number of blockchain companies, and it's the same thing. It's the same allocation discussion. Everything is the same. The question is, what do they get? Like, I know one of my clients that was doing tokens, they were allocating a portion of the tokens to the employees.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think I saw a great question here. It's asking how much percentage usually for the advisors and, sometimes lawyers and investment bankers.
So that is a really good question. And there's actually companies that track that, including, I think there's one called Veritas and Compensia. And you can, if you're a company and can afford their expensive costs, that's it. A general rule of thumb that I operate on, if I don't want to hire Compensia or my clients can't do it, is at very early stages, 0.25% for a good advisor is reasonable. If they're what I call a rock star, they can get as much as 3 or 4%. of the fully diluted shares, but usually it's the issued shares. So, but 0.25% is pretty common. And I act as an advisor for a number of companies. My wife does as well. And that's usually a number that we get is around 0.25% at an early stage. Later stage, it's much less because there's less risk. The value of those shares is much higher, et cetera, et cetera. But if you can afford it, it's well worth going to Compensia or Veritas or these companies and getting their data.
Thanks, Frank. So frankly, we're running a little bit late. So
Okay.
Do you think we answered the last question from the audience? And
Sure.
Probably Leo, you may pick one for Frank, or Frank,
Yeah,
if you want to look at the question list and pick on your
I just pick one.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I think there is a question about the shareholding and the vote versus voting rights. Maybe some CEOs holding 20% of the company, but has 60% of the voting power. How was that structured, Frank?
So it can be done in different ways. Recently, we've done that through a voting proxy.
Mm-hmm.
Because the founder wanted the people to actually have the shares and get the benefit of the potential upside, but he or she wanted to control the voting. And so we entered into a condition of these people getting stock was they agreed to give to the CEO founder their voting rights until a certain event. And oftentimes it's an acquisition or an IPO, or in one case we did the company being break even financially. That was the case. But you can also do it by creating a second security. For example, you see companies who go public, they often have a second security which has most of the voting rights. Facebook has a security which has 10 times the voting rights of the publicly traded common stock. So you can do it that way too. Either way works. I personally prefer the voting proxy, but because it only goes through an IPO. If you want to control after the public offering, then the other way, creating the special security that has 10x the voting rights, that's the way to go.
Gotcha. Thank you, Frank. I guess we're running out of time. I just before giving the mic to Eve, I just want to say, I in my mind, entrepreneurs are the most respectful people. They work very hard. Everyone can find a job, but not everyone has the courage to start a business. And I think the business of the game of starting a business is fun and intellectually stimulating. And we are here at Remont to support you in your journey to be successful. Thank you for attending this event. So, Ifo.
Well said. Thank you, Leo. And also thank you, Frank, putting on quite a great event for our community members. So here's Leo's contact and also Frank's contact. If you run into any legal problem or questions, feel free to shoot them an email. And also thank you again for attending today's event.
Thank you so much. See you next time.
Thank you, everyone.